Go, Gary. Yeah, you can use that.
Yeah.
Okay, lovely. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. As David said, my name's Gary Baker, and in 1980 I was in the Royal Air Force as a radar operator based at RAF Neatishead. But before we talk about that, I'll just give a little bit of an idea about me, and also just for you to know that this is the first time I've spoken to a UFO audience, so I don't really know what you guys really want, whether you want me to be serious and just stay focused on a subject, or whether you like a little bit of anecdotal stuff. I'm very happy to tell the odd little military joke in there, so if that's okay with you, I will do that. Right, well, as I said, I was in the Royal Air Force, but that's not what I do now. I'm a mental health nurse, and I have been for quite a few years. And my interest, as it is with the UFO subject, came about by accident. I was in the dentist having a checkup, and like all dentists or doctors, it's fantastic in the waiting room. If you're a woman, there's plenty of magazines for you. But if you're a man, there's nothing really for you to read, unless you like Women's Own or Cosmopolitan. And I looked down at the coffee table and there was a magazine, a UFO magazine, and I wasn't really interested in the subject as such. So I picked it up and had a look through, and there was an article about the MOD releasing their files on the 1980 Rendlesham Forest UFO incident. And I didn't know anything about this particular incident. It passed me by at the time when it was reported in the news of the world. I was in the Royal Air Force, and I was really only interested in going to heavy rock concerts and getting drunk, as a young man would. But I read through it, and it rang bells in my ears. And I thought, that's the incident that I was involved in the RAF. And as I read through more, it mentioned about the radar camera at RAF Neatishead, which was where I was based, was turned off. And I thought, well, that's not true. And I read through more, and it said that the Royal Air Force or the MOD classified it as of no defence significance. And that didn't ring true at all, because in 1980, we was in the middle of the Cold War, a very, very serious time and sobering time to be in the job that I'd done. We regularly had incursions into our airspace by Russian Bear Delta aircraft that would come over the North Cape from way beyond the top of Norway and enter our airspace, and we would launch interceptor aircraft. Now, what I would like to do is, first off, just point out the differences between air traffic control and air defence, because you quite often read people get confused and marry the two together. Air traffic control is responsible from transiting aircraft through airways or controlled airspace from A to B, taking off and landing. Now, if we went to war and the Russians came to invade us or to attack by air, the Royal Air Force, Air Defence, would be responsible for meeting that threat. And the way that that's done is to identify every single aircraft in the sky. And I don't know whether you've ever seen a picture of the radar picture of the UK. There's literally hundreds of aircraft airborne at any one time. So it's really a big job to recognise and identify all of those aircraft and keep tabs on them. But when it's broken down into little jobs, it's quite an easy task. And my job as an aerospace systems operator was part of that overall picture, to recognise all of the aircraft in the sky, and if there was an aircraft that we didn't recognise that shouldn't be there, we would send interceptor aircraft to investigate. And as quite often happened when the Russians came over, the aircraft would be escorted out of our airspace, and that was that. And in our crew room, we often had pictures of Russian airmen holding up Coke cans, and these pictures were taken from the interceptor aircraft But when I was in the Royal Air Force, it was Lightning and Phantom, and the Tornado was just phasing in. And obviously they're all like obsolete now. But I'm going to focus on the Royal Air Force Air Defence from that period, 1980. Completely different animal now. They have all sorts of wonderful things like over-the-horizon radar. In those days, it wasn't the case at all. So our radars travelled in straight lines, and the Earth being a globe, radar travels in a straight line. So the further out the radar signal goes, the more high-level and less low-level coverage you get. So there is gaps in the radar picture at long range. And Russians took advantage of that by dropping their aircraft at sea level and coming in under the radar. So those holes in the picture was augmented by airborne early warning aircraft. So that's the basic backdrop. Now, my time in the Royal Air Force started in 1978 from school. I knew I was going into the Royal Air Force before I left school. It was ordained that I was going to do that. My father was in the RAF. I dreamed about aircraft. I was in the Air Cadets. I was aircraft mad. And obviously service in the Royal Air Force cured that. So I joined in November 1978 as a 16-year-old boy, never shaved before, and then all of a sudden I had to shave. There was nothing there to shave, but I still had to shave. And then you'd have someone come and inspect your face to make sure you'd done so, and all the rest of it. It was a wonderful time to join the Royal Air Force because it was actually large then and we had lots of aircraft. Now it's a very small operation but still very professional and capable, I'm sure. So in the summer of 1979, after I'd finished my trade training as an aerospace systems operator at the School of Fighter Control, where I trained in West Drayton in London, I was posted to Neatishead, which is a radar station in the middle of Norfolk, in the middle of the Norfolk Broads. And Neatishead was responsible for the southern half of the United Kingdom airspace. And any aircraft in the southern half of the UK, we were responsible for recognising those aircraft and also to initiate interceptor aircraft, airborne early warning, tanker aircraft, and all of the aircraft that support intercept. So within that job, there's an awful lot of jobs to do. There is heights where somebody sits in a cabin and a position is requests, can you go to bearing so-and-so and get a height? So we would do that. So there's lots and lots of interesting jobs to do within the trade. And the job itself was split into shifts because you don't knock off at 5 o'clock on a Friday and the Russians have got a free hand to come and visit while you're all up the pub. So it was shift work 24/7, and Neatishead had 2 squadrons, 1 squadron and 2 squadron ops. I was on 2 squadron, and that was broken down into 2 watches, Y watch and Z watch, and I was on Y watch. So you'd do 4 days on and 4 days off, 2 day shifts, 2 night shifts. And also there would be squadron days where you did work Monday to Friday, either earlies or lates, and when the end of flying finished at, say, 9, 10 o'clock at night, you'd go home. So that was the routine job, Monday to Friday, or if you were on watch, 4 on, 4 off. And in 1980, over the Christmas period, I came back into Neatishead after the Christmas period, and the whole of the ops room was buzzing with rumours and talk of a UFO flap. Bearing in mind that the people who delivered the job at Neatishead were used to seeing Russian bombers coming over, and we would send fighters to intercept, and the conversation would be, Ivan came over yesterday. Oh yeah, all right, okay. You going down the pub on Friday? So our focus was going out, having a good time, and the job was routine, even Russian spies coming over, spy planes coming over. But something like a UFO flap got everybody interested and talking. And that was the buzz. There's been a UFO flap, which was interesting to everybody. Within a day or two, guys from the Ministry of Defence and high-ranking officers came to Neatishead and took personnel from both squadrons, that's 1 and 2 squadron, together in the briefing room at RAF Neatishead. We was all jammed in like sardines, all the officers at the front in comfy chairs, all the airmen like me having to poke in and fit in where you could. And we was told that this event didn't happen and you don't talk about it. And they took away radar tapes of the event, and also bridge logs. Pages were ripped out of the bridge logs. Now, at the time it was interesting, but I forgot all about it. And then many years later, as I said, I was in the dentist and I read this article, and it made me quite annoyed that they'd lied and said that there was no radar evidence, when in actual fact they took away the radar tapes. But it was also misleading in as much as they said the radar camera was switched off. Well, there was 2 air defence radars at Neatishead, Type 84 and Type 85 radar. And all of those pictures were recorded. This was at a time when the Cold War was at its hottest and things were happening. Lech Wałęsa was agitating in Poland and Russians were massing on the border. And it was a very, very scary time to be involved at that level, when you knew that if it became a hot war, you probably didn't have very long to live if they did launch weapons. So the backdrop is the Cold War, and we are told that they're switching off radar cameras. That did not happen. Those were definitely on all of the time. So I was good at reading that. So I contacted the editor of that particular magazine. He's since passed away, and said who I was, and he came and interviewed me and what have you, and that's how I got involved in a very minor way, because this is completely separate to what Colonel Halt and all of the USAF guys did on the ground, of which I was unaware of at the time. But the two are linked, because there was evidence, radar evidence, and they did take the tapes away, and whether that was a cover-up for whatever reason, I don't really know, but it did happen. Now, if you look at the time, we were being regularly probed by the Russians, and if it became known at that time that there was holes in our air defence where these aircraft could suddenly appear over land or very close into military bases, it would not only raise eyebrows at the highest level, it would cause panic into society. At the time of the Cold War, the RAF can't maintain the safety of our airspace, etc. And it would also alert the Russians that there's holes in our defence. So that may be one reason why it was covered up. One possible reason. There are others. But for me, the fact that they lied about those tapes is quite significant. And it's something which I've thought about for many years now, and I can only come to the conclusion that it is nothing to do with hiding evidence of UFOs. Whether the Americans have done that, I really don't know. But from an RAF perspective, we did not see UFOs all of the time. This is purely and simply a cover-up to prevent people thinking that the RAF do not maintain the airspace. But the crucial factor is, in the Royal Air Force, when you're looking at maintaining that air safety, your enemy, your would-be enemy, the Russians, came from the northeast, and the aircraft would fly along and behave in a certain way because there's guys in there. They don't fly at huge speed, pulling massive turns, pulling Gs, because there's humans in there. And when you see on radar those aircraft on a regular basis, they all behave in a particular way. And that on raw radar is a slight blur behind the paint as it sweeps round. And you can see the gaps increasing with speed. For example, Blackbird SR-71, when you see that on radar, it has quite large gaps between each sweep because it's flying fast. But it still behaves like a conventional aircraft in as much as it will turn in a certain way, etc. Now, we are conditioned and geared towards looking east and northeast. That's where the enemy is. And you're always recognising aircraft that are coming down air corridors. You're sent NOTAMs saying to expect Speedbird so-and-so or a Scandi, all these airliners going down airways. We know exactly what they are, but we do not have any idea of something that would appear overhead, over land. And if this is what these UFOs at Rendlesham done, they did not come from the east. Air defence radar was not aware of them. They would suddenly appear over land. Now, the radar RAF Neatishead was old-fashioned raw radar, and when you saw that on a radar screen, it created ground clutter, which is like a load of interference and clouds over the land. But that is not an issue or a problem because your enemy is coming from the northeast, from hundreds of miles out, and you're tracking them in. The enemy does not appear immediately on top of you from above. And if an aircraft does appear in that way, it would not be recognised as being an aircraft if it's just a blip that appears and then appears somewhere else, just a blip. It would not be seen as an aircraft, but as a radar glitch. And for me, any evidence over Rendlesham would not be classified or seen as an aircraft, but as an anomaly of radar, as a glitch. Now, I do know that the tower at Rendlesham contacted Eastern Radar at Watton, and Eastern Radar was an air traffic establishment, and they were predominantly geared towards controlling aircraft along air corridors from A to B and going into various airports to land and handing over to the air traffic at those airfields or airports. And that would be civil and military. And they did not have an air defence capability, so if they received a phone call from the tower at Rendlesham and they said, do you have any aircraft operating adjacent to our base? They could genuinely say, well, no, we don't have any aircraft there, but they also do not have responsibility for recognising or investigating those aircraft. That's an air defence issue. And contact was made by Eastern Radar to Neatishead to that effect. And that's where the trail of any bridge logs at Neatishead refers to that contact there. And when I presume Squadron Leader Moreland at Rendlesham, at Bentwaters base, sent his report to his commanding officer, that then cascaded a chain of events that led to the MOD coming to Neatishead and removing the tapes. And whether they decided then or later that they're going to say that they didn't have any radar evidence of that, I don't know. But there is, or certainly was, radar evidence. What that evidence was, I do not know, but it would certainly be caught up in ground clutter and would not be recognised as being significant in terms of activity that we was looking for. In other words, aircraft coming from the northeast of Soviet or Warsaw Pact origination. So that is basically the drop back of it, but I can assure you that everybody in the Royal Air Force would have been focusing on that as their sole responsibility to maintain readiness for the threat from Russia. Whether they now have the ability to look up and see what's coming from outer space, I have absolutely no idea, but it certainly wasn't an issue that happened at that time. it was just purely to meet the need for a Russian attack on us, and that's all that we really were there for. And obviously, part and parcel of that is a routine, it's a training thing, and you go into Neater's Head and there'd be an exercise, and your job would be in the ops room to do various tasks, or if you were really unlucky, you'd be collared to go out on guard to guard against attack. I remember one time we had the parachute regiment, one of the battalions of the parachute regiment, pretending to be Russian Spetsnaz, special forces attacking Neater's Head. And bearing in mind that the Royal Air Force isn't really known for its soldiering skills, when I'd done my basic training, we had our range firing certificate, the SLR, 7.62mm gas-operated self-loading rifle. When I fired my SLR for the first time, I fired on the guy next door's target. So when we went down to the end, he had 30 or 40 holes in his, and I had none in mine. And there was no time for me to have a reshoot. So that was my first experience of shooting in the Air Force. So my job was to be in the ops room, but they needed guards to go on duty and stand in the little sand huts called sangars and guard, to stand guard against a possible attack. And I was told by my sergeant to go and report to the guard commander this particular day, and I was one of the latecomers. And I got there and everybody had been issued their SLR with a blank firing attachment on and sent to their positions, and I was late, and this sergeant said, "Take your weapon." So I picked up an SLR and there was no blank firing attachment to fix to it. And I said, "Sergeant, there's no BFAs." And he said, "Well, just shout bang then." This is the Royal Air Force in the Cold War, and I am 17, 18 years old, so it's not many years between then and when I was running around as a schoolboy shouting bang with my friends. And I joined the Air Force because I thought I was going to be really macho and a hero military guy, and I'm being told to shout bang. So I'm stood on this sanger, and about 20 feet in front of me is a 12-foot fence with a hedge 12 foot high, and I'm really tall, 5'5", so I can't see anything beyond this fence, and I'm stood there for 2 hours, and then the hedge starts trembling in front of me, and then a head appeared at the top, cammed face, para-style helmet on, and I proceeded to shout bang, bang at this para who was smiling and laughing at me. And then his mate popped up next to him and they started firing their weapons with BFAs. So we had an argument over who shot who first, because they didn't have equipment in those days, the electronic stuff to say you're dead or you've been shot, so lay down or whatever. So we had an argument over who shot who. And they jumped over, landed, came up to me, and he hit me over the side of the head with his rifle butt. And I'm just a gentle Royal Air Force guy, and there's this, excuse the language, hairy-ass para hits me over the side of the head with a rifle butt. And it really hurt. And when I was relieved, my sergeant was not happy. He wanted to charge me for losing my weapon. That's the para took the weapon off me as well. And then he wanted to charge me for losing a weapon. He didn't care whether I was struck over the side of the head by a para. So we was really professional in the Air Force at that level. But the real operation inside the ops room was very, very professional. But there was radar evidence and it was taken away. So whatever you've read, don't believe it. There was radar evidence. It exists. What that actually proves is another thing. Where it came from, I don't know. But what I know is there is evidence, and the reason it's covered up is probably to save the Royal Air Force being embarrassed rather than part and parcel of some massive conspiracy. So that's my little story. If anybody's got any questions they'd like to ask, feel free. If anybody would like to approach me during the course of the day, I'd be happy to give a more in-depth and flavoursome story to them. So thank you very much for listening to me. Thank you, David.
Chinese or anybody else.
Could it have been American?
No.
So one of you guys was radar or something?
That's me, yeah.
That's you, yeah, radar. So you were there with the nights that it happened? Did you see anything or did you become aware of it?
I became aware of it because there was a massive buzz in the ops room about a UFO incident. The Ministry of Defence a number of days later came down. We were taken into the briefing room, both squadrons at Neatishead. We're in the briefing room and we were told this never happened. We're not to talk about it. They removed the radar tapes and there were two radars, Type 84, Type 85 air defence radars, and they also took the bridge logs of the events. Then many years later I saw an article in a magazine that said that the MOD released information on the UFO incident at Rendlesham, and it said that the radar cameras were switched off at 67 on that day, and there's no radar evidence, and it wasn't of defence significance. Well, I completely disagree that is the case in both cases.
And curious if you bring things up to date on this recent Nimitz encounter.
Absolutely,
guys
yeah.
coming in similar circumstances. So I want to talk about data taken away.
Yeah,
Data blocks,
absolutely, yeah. I've every reason that there's a whole host of a raft of information that contains UFO stuff. What they are, I have absolutely no idea, but I do know that it's a phenomenon that does take place and is recorded by militaries around the world.
Yeah, I agree.
When it happened on the night, how did everyone else react to it?
Well, they were almost in, you mean it was with me?
Yeah.
Oh, they were almost in shock.
Really? Wasn't the scene like kind of like a crash site, kind of like?
Well, I didn't see anything that resembled a crash site. All I saw were the three indentations and the glowing objects in the sky. So,
It's bizarre.
other than having read a book as a teenager and put it aside, I never gave UFOs a thought again until what happened. In fact, I was convinced it wasn't a UFO till I got out into the forest.
Yeah.